I think Muhammad was a false prophet. According to many Muslims, Muhammad married a 6-year-old girl and slept with her when she was 9. I think that's wrong. Muhammad does not recognize that Jesus Christ is God. Therefore, I think he's a false prophet. Now, these are my beliefs as a Christian. But everything I just said, if we keep on going in the direction that we're going in the UK, would land me in prison. Because with the current increase in Islamophobia, our government is using it as an opportunity to clamp down on free speech. So now we're going to watch Head of Policy from Christian Concern, a Christian advocacy group, explain just how dangerous this train of movement is, and make sure you stay to the end so that you are prepared.
Now, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has said policing in the UK is conducted without fear or favour, adding that those engaged in the violence seen over the weekend will feel the full force of the law. Now, let's get the thoughts of the Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern, Tim Dieppe. Now, Tim, there's already talk of bringing in this Islamophobia definition as a response to these riots, and many people will be concerned that will have negative impact on freedom of expression. What do you think about those concerns?
Yeah, well, I've been concerned about this for quite some time, Emma. The APPG definition, which is the definition that people are talking about, proposed by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims, reads that Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. And straight away, you can see many problems with that. First of all, Islam is not a race, so calling it racism isn't right. And secondly, it's talking about this vague term Muslimness, whatever that means. It could encompass all sorts of things, beliefs or practices. And then it goes on to say perceived Muslimness. So really, it's anything that somebody perceives to be Islamophobic, which could well include criticism of Islamic beliefs or practices, which anybody who's not a Muslim should be free to say, I disagree with Islamic practices or disagree with Islamic beliefs, or, for example, that Muhammad is not a prophet, or Muhammad did immoral things like fight in wars and battles and kill lots of non-Muslims and so on. So I'm very concerned that making this definition law would effectively be an Islamic blasphemy code. I wrote a report earlier this year for the Free Speech Union called Islamophobia, Banning Islamophobia, Blasphemy by the Back Door. Richard Dawkins wrote the foreword to it. So it's widely agreed that this is a problematic definition. But another problem is it's been very widely adopted, and it's not least by political parties themselves. In fact, the Labour Party has formally adopted this definition of Islamophobia as part of its code of conduct. So any Labour MP, any member of the Labour Party who says something that is criticising perceived Muslimness risks being suspended from the party or disciplined for that. And so you already have an effective sort of blasphemy code or restriction on what people can say about Islam in the Labour Party amongst the majority of MPs in Parliament. And that's already very concerning to me.
Now, some people would say in response to this, well, there has been a rise in Islamophobia and attacks directed at Muslims, so we do need to clamp down on Islamophobia. But see, the key is any violent attacks on Muslims, we already have laws to protect them. And those are laws that apply equally to everybody, regardless of the motivation. So we don't need additional laws to protect people from Islamophobia, which, as Tim Dieppe rightly highlighted, is not the same as racism. Islam is not a race. You can be a white Muslim, doesn't matter. We already have laws to protect from that. The danger is the state cannot and should not prescribe what people should or should not think or feel, because then the state begins to play the position of God. Instead, what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to debate and critique things, because if we can never debate and critique, we can never arrive at the truth. And so what you end up having is compliance, but society regresses. People rebel. People feel resentful. And also, people who really do want to dominate and subjugate will use this to their advantage. So they will play the law to crack down on harmful speech, but then they will begin to prescribe your beliefs. But as for me, I believe that it is true that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and that because of that, the wages of our sin is death and eternal hell separated from God. And the only way that we can be forgiven of those sins, forgiven of our transgressions, is not through the Prophet Muhammad, is not through Sikhism, is not through Buddhism, but is only through believing in Jesus Christ, Son of God, who died on the cross and rose again on the third day to pay the price for sins for those who believe in him. Now, you may not agree with that. You may reject that. You may not believe that. And I will not impose on you that belief. I believe God will be the judge. I don't want to weaponize the law to force you to conform to that. Unfortunately, there are people who do want to weaponize the law to enforce you to believe what they believe.
You can see why this is coming up again, though, considering that in recent days mosques have been the target of violent protests and intimidation. Worshippers in those mosques feeling intimidated with, mobs of thugs outside. I mean, what do you do to protect people exercising their faith in a free country without adopting such a prescriptive definition? Well,
listen, the scenes that we have seen across the country over the last weekend have been absolutely horrific and appalling and heartbreaking. And it's criminal activity, whether it's violence or vandalism of any kind, it's already against the law. So what we need to do is enforce the law as it stands against every person, no matter what their creed or race or age or whatever it might be. You know, everybody should face the full consequence of the law for this horrific scenes that people have seen all over the country. And I hope they do, and I hope they face those proper consequences. What I'm concerned about is we shouldn't therefore, come in and as a sort of knee-jerk reaction, introduce something that would actually criminalize free speech or criminalize legitimate speech about Islam as a religion. You've got to be free to criticize religions and ideologies. What is a good term is to say anti-Muslim. And that is what some of these protests are, very clearly anti-Muslim. And that makes clear it's about the people rather than the ideology itself. You've got to be able to criticize the ideology while saying anti-Muslim prejudice is wrong. And I'm very happy to say that, and let's say that. But I really don't think we need laws. What we do need is the laws that we have existing fully enforced across the board. Anybody who breaks the law, wherever they do it, whenever they do it, however they do it, whoever they are that does it, should always face the full consequences of the law. And that I totally hope we will see as a consequence of these various riots and criminality that we've seen on the screens.
So what you'll see is that people will highlight times when Muslims have been wrongly attacked and have been the victims in situations, but they'll weaponize that victimhood in order to impose policy telling you what to believe. And I think that kind of weaponizing victimhood can only succeed in Western countries that have been built on Christian values. Why do I say that? Well, it's because the Christian faith is a faith that talks about the meek inheriting the earth. So not the strong and powerful dominating, but rather us being subdued. Our Savior, instead of calling down an army of angels to defend himself, he willingly went and sacrificed himself on a cross. And he taught his disciples that vengeance belongs to the Lord. Turn the other cheek in matters of personal vengeance. So we're very compassionate and empathetic to the weak. We're very compassionate to victims because we want to step in and defend them. So we're very sensitive to this kind of weaponizing of victimhood. I don't think you would see the same thing in a Muslim world. I don't think you would see the same thing in China. I don't think you would see these kind of things over there. But what that means is we need to be innocent as doves, but wise as serpents, to know when people are trying to use it in that manner. And you might think, just don't talk about Islam. Just talk about your religion. But we've seen examples of where Christians haven't even said anything and yet have still been arrested. So if we want to live in a country where our children can freely proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ and tell the gospel to their friends and family so that they may too be saved, then we need to speak up against this.
Tim, that definition of Islamophobia that you mentioned, that also uses as examples criticisms of the Islamic religion as being instrumental to attack Muslims. So when you see Keir Starmer, who is being pressured to adopt this as a legal definition to make Islamophobia illegal, when you see him talking about cracking down on things that people say online, do you think that this could have a serious, more than a chilling impact on free speech, not just with respect to criticism of Islam, but also for those who might be critical of Islamism?
Yes, absolutely. And I really hope this does not happen. I certainly don't want to support incitement to violence. and threats and incitement to violence should be and are already a criminal offence and should be properly dealt with. And I agree with that. But then it's where do they broaden it out to that? And that's what I'm concerned about, broadening it out to criticism of Islam, Islam as a religion. You're quite right. The report that goes with the definition actually included examples of even historical things, like saying Islam spread by the sword, or even saying things about Muhammad in some cases would be considered Islamophobic. And that's wrong. I think it's anti-Muslim that we need to use, not Islamophobia in general as a term. And I'm very concerned about how this could work out in terms of a threat to free speech with a majority parliament of Labour MPs who've all agreed to abide by that code of conduct that adopts this definition. How will they stand up and say we don't agree with this definition? I think it's a very concerning thing. We could easily see an Islamic blasphemy law in this country, and we just need more and more people to realise the threat that this is and to write to their MPs and tell them this is really must not happen across this country as a result of these awful riots and violence that we've seen.
And even if these blasphemy laws do get passed and they tell us Christians, don't say that, do you know what I'll say? The same words of the Apostle Peter. Whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to the true God, the triune God, you must judge. For we cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard. And I have seen and heard that the Lord Jesus is the one true God, and that all other gods are the works of men, including the Muslim God. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one. Peace and blessings.